Okay. All right. So we're going to talk about self-governance. I think there's been such a misconception of what self-governance is and what it isn't. Um, and so we're going to just, it's 11 slides, but we're going to talk a lot about this. All right. So self-governance begins with self-mastery. Self-mastery is when you've mastered the art of controlling your emotions and therefore your reactions. It is being self aware of your values, passions, and aspirations. It is how well those standards fit with your environment and your reactions. And I know John Petruccio talks a lot about this in his, it's on our agenda. I think it's, self mastery is something he talks about, but it's universal self governance, I think, is his course. Yeah, universal self governance with John Petruccio. And basically, we have to start with, self governance before we even talk about a government. uh, we have to govern ourselves first. And, one of the things I love so much about all of you in this assembly is I haven't ever witnessed anybody in this assembly uh, um, allow their emotions to get out of control. Some of the things that we've learned about other assemblies is that people, when they have a disagreement, they're like, picking up chairs and slamming chairs and using vulgar language and all sorts of crazy nonsense. And I will say that it's been such a blessing to be on this assembly with all of you who clearly have control over your emotions. And so I don't think that this is an issue for us. Um, so I'm going to move on. Benefits of self-mastery. So improve your skills, recognizing what you do well and what to improve on. And I think that this is important for us as we're trying to figure out where we fit in this assembly, right? Like you're coming into this assembly and you have to know yourself well enough to know what your skill sets, what your God-given talents are, and how you can apply them here. We have so many different committees. Some are creative, some are more technical, depending on who you are, what your personality is, and what your skill sets are. Knowing yourself well enough allows you to know what areas you'll be able to help in this government. Raising your happiness, aligning your ideas with your actions. If people are walking around with negative thoughts in their mind all the time, they're going to be speaking negatively and coming across as negatively. Have you ever met somebody that's like what you would consider a Debbie Downer? And, that's no offense to anybody whose name is Debbie, but, we want to make sure that our frequency is, vibrating high and that we're, it's not to say that you don't ever get sad or something upsets you, but basically your ideas about life and about this government and the way you want to see the world is going to be in alignment with your actions. And the next thing is strengthening your relationship, learning how to manage your emotions. Like I said, a lot of you have been really great, showing great etiquette and professionalism on our calls. But this is more of a deeper emotion. We have all, we are mankind and we have so many other emotions. And some people can mask things better than others, and that's not what this is referring to. Managing your emotions is being able to feel them, but not letting them rule your life. And so, just allowing yourself to feel the emotions, but looking at them objectively and not letting them, dictate your reactions. Increase your work motivation. So discovering your passion and what fuels it. So, that's why we say, coming into this assembly, you want to figure out, what are your skill sets? What are your talents? And I know that that's hard, maybe for some of us because we've been taught our whole lives, starting with the education, department is that we have been told for most of our life to sit down, shut up, and do what you're told. Memorize this information, take a test to see how well you can memorize it, and being able to use your own mind and your own creativity and your own thoughts and ideas. There's very rare places, especially nowadays, that allows us to do that anymore. And I think that that's probably why we're seeing so much chaos in the world right now. And that's what the puppet masters wanted from us, right? They wanted to be able to control us. And so they had to get control over the education system so that they could foster that environment of sitting down, shutting up, and doing what you're told. And here in our government, it's the complete opposite. We want you to, I don't care if you're standing or, you got your cameras off. I don't know if you're doing, standing there doing squats. I don't know. But we certainly want to hear your ideas. We want you to speak. We don't want to keep you silent. We love to hear your ideas, because, um, two heads are better than one. We come up with, we're more creative when we collaborate together and talk about our ideas together. And so, that's part of self-mastery. Positive outcome of self-mastery is you have a growth mindset, right? In this assembly, I mean, we are growing. And, I see the growth on all of our assemblies across the country. I interview them, and I'm actually going to be interviewing the New Hampshire Assembly soon. But there's so much growth going on, and you have to have a growth mindset. When you're just like that in the box kind of thinker, that really prohibits you from growing. And so, we have to be able to set goals for ourselves. Dan just talked about how, he's going to put together a meeting, in the next few months or so to start planning for 2026. And so that's a growth mindset, planning for the future and seeing the trends that are taking place in our assemblies and having a vision of what we want the world to look like. And optimism, I know that there's a difference between, like realism and optimism. It's okay to be realistic. We just, again, don't want to be Debbie Downers. We want to recognize big emotions and learn how to deal with them, and try to stay positive. We need optimism, especially in a world that all we see is negativity, so much craziness going on in the world, and we're called, to be the light of the world. And so we need to remember that and stay on point there. And the next thing is self-confidence, to establish good relationship with the people around you. Self-confidence, being confident in who you are. We're all different, and that's such a beautiful thing that God made us so uniquely different, and still the same, right? But knowing who you are and having the confidence to be who you are, and that allows you to establish healthy relationships with those around us. All right, next slide. Ways to cultivate self-mastery through self-awareness. Gain a different perspective. Ask for feedback. That's really important. And we talked about a couple of months ago, we were talking about doing questionnaires. Again, I'd love for somebody to create a questionnaire. It could be a printed one, and we could hand it out at maybe one of our face-to-face meetings, and it'll be anonymous. And we could read them aloud and see what the feedback is. I could create a questionnaire for myself. How do you think I'm doing as an assembly chair and as a recording secretary? Because I'd love feedback. If there's an area, I know Alice is very big on this too, is getting feedback from our peers on how they think we're doing, because we're always looking to improve, and we're all learning on the job here. So there's definitely room for improvement. But the next thing on the next bullet on there is reflective listening. Dan, do you want to talk about that? Would you mind doing that for me? What reflective listening is?
Reflective listening. Let me see what your slide says. I'm kind of curious.
I
So
just, yeah, I
it's
just
an
have,
interesting it's an interesting theory because and it's a skill set because a lot of people don't necessarily think like this, right? But you could be having a conversation with somebody and they're trying to explain something to you that is meaningful to them or is it's just a strong passion or whatever it may be for that person. And sometimes when we're listening, we're hearing, but we're really not acknowledging. And then sometimes we'll respond with literally a response to what's been said. But a lot of times when you do that and you take that approach, the recipient or the person that's trying to explain um, almost feels like you're not even listening. So one way to, really help, create a sense of, I guess the right word is genuinity in the conversation so that the other person knows you're actually listening and aware is to kind of state it back in such a way that um, makes them understand that it's almost asking them back in a question. So, they say something and it's a response like, um, so if I'm hearing you right, you're saying this, correct? And so it's again, it's kind of reflective back to what they actually said so that you're clearly acknowledging what they said, but it also helps you because now your mind now switches to your frontal lobe and responds more appropriately, if that makes any sense. Is that helpful, Tammy?
yeah, yeah, it's perfect. Yeah, and I like to use the example of when we were kids, we played the game telephone, right? Where you think of something to say, you say it to the person next to you, and then that person says it to the next one, and it goes down the line. And by the time it gets to the end, it's a completely different statement than what you originally said. And it was funny. I remember as a kid doing that, and it was so funny. But it makes a really great point is that sometimes when you say something, the person that's hearing you is perceiving it differently than what you meant it to mean. And so that reflective listening, like Dan was saying, helps to get clarity on what they actually mean. All right. Um, Journal your awareness. Write your thoughts down. Keep track of your emotions. Practice listening. Don't judge. I think that's sometimes it's a hard concept to, not judge people on what they say, but keeping an open mind, paying attention and observing. I know Alice does a really great job. All the quiet people on the assembly, I know Dan is good at observing too. Uh, this was something that I had to learn a little bit more. Uh, I like to talk, so um, listening, I do listen, but I had to train myself to do the 90-10 rule, which is you're listening 90% of the time and talking 10% of the time. And so, when you're getting to know people, that helps because you want them, if you're trying to get to know them, you want them to be doing more of the talking. Create space and time to connect with yourself and avoid social distraction. We've got so much social distraction, meaning like our cell phones and our screens, whether it's a computer or TV or whatever. But I think it's important to stay on, to take breaks from social media. All right, moving on. So don't ignore your feelings, rather explore them. And this is, I think, really important because we don't want to dismiss our feelings. I'm a solution-based thinker. So if somebody comes to me with a problem or something, I'm always trying to, come up with a solution. And that works well for our government because, like we know, if there's a controversy, our job is to remove controversy and offer up a remedy. So if we're constantly complaining, and all we're doing is complaining without offering up a solution, you know, um, it's all you're doing is complaining. But in the same breath, we also want to gain awareness of our emotions. We want to pay attention to them. And sometimes paying attention to your gut as much as your brain could be more beneficial. And pay attention to triggers. Did you ever have you ever talked with somebody and all of a sudden you say the slightest little thing and all of a sudden they've lost control and you're like, wait, what did I just say? What did I do? Um, and that's called the trigger. You triggered them, and if that happens to you, I know it's happened to me. You want to pay attention to that and explore that a little bit. That's going to help you, uh, you know, um, gain that self mastery of your emotions. Keep track of your feelings, notice destructive patterns and trends, work on creating new positive habits that lead to positive outcomes that support the life you want. And that's also something for us to really focus on because, like I said, we have been indoctrinated to believe that our job is to just go to an election poll and put a vote in for a bureaucrat to do all the work for us. And so we really have to undo that indoctrination and start to think about what it is to be an official government. What is that supposed to feel like? And step into that feeling of not just thinking, we are the American government on New Jersey, but start feeling what does that feel like? And so I think when you start, resonating with that feeling, you start behaving in such the way that you are the government. And then you come across as more confident and, in stepping into that role. All right, 7 different ways to practice self-mastery. And these are just some of the things that, I was thinking on, but I know that a lot of people have their own. But meditation, and I would put even praying with this. I know a lot of you are faith-based people, and so spending time in meditation and prayer will help you to reflect on your inner self. I know yoga is great for, disciplining your mind on how to, teaching your mind how to be disciplined. Self-reflection, this will help you to understand your emotions, like reflecting on maybe a trigger you may have had, and then exploring that, that's self-reflection. Journaling, I'm not a big journaler, but I know that some people are. And this helps you to keep track of what's going on, with your thoughts, your emotions, your feelings, and just trying to get to know yourself better and what makes you tick. 8. So how does this all tie into self-governance? Well, when you have achieved self-mastery, you show up as your best self and show that you are capable of self-governing, meaning that you're capable of not only governing yourself, your own body, but you're capable of governing, being a servant in the government. All right. And people who are self-governing, when someone has a high level of self-awareness and is self-governing, they ask questions for clarity. They respond appropriately with respect and kindness. They are self-motivators. They don't need to be, reminded that there's something that they have to do or be. They're responsible and accountable. That's a big one, because in our government, we have to show up as the responsible and accountable parties. And that's a huge one. I think a huge difference from going from the de facto into our government, because somebody else was always responsible for the government. We weren't responsible or accountable. We could point a finger at somebody and say, "Hey, you passed that bill, you did this," and there's no personal responsibility or accountability. And that's one of the biggest differences in our government. Uh, they find solutions to problems, kind of like what I was saying, is that, and this is a part of the training of the law of mankind. If anybody signed up for that course, This is a part of that training is it teaches you how to remove controversy and how to offer up a remedy. Um, Self-governing people are knowledgeable. They don't have to be coerced or coaxed into learning something. They're eager to learn, and therefore they're knowledgeable. They have a high moral compass. I think that's why all of you are here today, because you have a high moral compass. You see that there's something wrong in the world, and you just kept digging and digging and digging until you found the answer. And now you've stepped up, you corrected your status, you did all the paperwork to undo the fraud, and now you're here actually doing something. Self-governing people communicate well. They seek the good in all. We don't want to assume that everybody is, an infiltrator, or we don't want to assume that, people are evil. We want to seek the good in all until, of course, they're proven otherwise. And the last one I have on here is self-governing means that you are leading by example. It's one thing to, say, hey, we're here building this government, and Alice is doing a great job, but we're all the leaders in this government. We all have a shared responsibility, and so we're leading by example. All right, next slide. What does this have to do with our government? Well, these are some of the tenets of our government. It's our job, it's our duty to keep the peace. If you are self-governing, you are better able to keep the peace. We also uphold the public law. When you have achieved self-mastery, you operate from a higher moral compass and are better suited to uphold the public law. Competence. When you are self-governing, you are more knowledgeable and are competent to run a government. And then professionalism. When you self-govern, you show up as your best self and prove you can be professional and therefore taken seriously. All right, and the last slide I have is a free resource page. And these, I'll share these links when I send out the playback for this. But these are just, I came across Joe Dispenza, I don't know, maybe a month ago, maybe 2 months ago, and love his stuff. He talks about a lot of great stuff. And he encompasses, he's done a couple of things on talking about Jesus. I know not everybody, we keep a separation of church and state, but he does have a couple talks on that. But most of his talks are neutral, and there's no religious, preferences to his work. But I loved these three, and but there's others out there too. But what you focus on, or what you focus your attention on, you attract. So if you're focusing your attention on all the bad news in the mainstream media, how there's riots going on in California, how there's a bird flu breaking out, there's wildfires here. If you focus on all the negativity, then that's what you're going to attract more of. But this is why I know on the coordinator training call, Michelle Ford has been saying for a long time, we've got to keep the blinders on. We've got to let all of that distraction be just white noise in the background. We've got to keep our focus on getting our government up and standing. And if we could focus on that, that's what we're going to attract more of. And then the next one is how negative emotions can control you. And so that's a good one. And then this one is she chose peace and became power. And so talking about how do you operate as someone who is peaceful? And there's a movie that's out there. I think I shared it with you guys a couple of times ago, but it's called The Peaceful Warrior. It's a great movie. I didn't think I was going to like it at first. I thought it was, but what was the actor's name in that movie, Dan? Do you remember? was it Neil or gosh, it's escaping me, but he's somebody that everybody knows. But these are great movies and different tools to teach us, that uh, we have more power when we're at peace. And we want to keep that in mind because, after all, we're flying our peacetime flag, the American peacetime flag. Our fiduciary and actually our head of state put out the peace proclamation that we are at peace. And so, we need to, if we're called to keep the peace and uphold the public law, we need to know and understand how to show up as somebody that's at peace. And so that's all I had for my